better than crud. I like birds and things, creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and welcome to those listening in Columbus and on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. Welcome to a very special Valentine's edition of For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the happiness of those around you. As I said, this is a very special Valentine's Day edition, so we're hoping everybody's feeling the love this morning. And I just wanted to say that I want to give people a little tip here, a little relationship advice, because it's terrible. Divorce rate is so high these days, and it's always sad when a relationship breaks up. I mean, I know sometimes it's necessary, but it always is a sort of a hurts me a little when I see that happen, and sometimes it could be avoided by just a few little extra touches. So if you've forgotten, like if you haven't gone out and gotten the flowers or the candy or haven't done anything, it's not terrible to like sneak off a little bit this morning and do a handmade Valentine. It's also very ecologically friendly. So what you do is you go off and you just fold a piece of paper in half, and then you draw half a heart on it, like you may have done back at grade school. You cut that out, and now you've got this nice little heart. You can write just a nice little message on there to your loved one, and it might work. It might fly. So cross your fingers, and literally it's better than nothing. So if you haven't done anything for your loved one today, try that. That might work. So as I said, we've got a good show for you today. We have Tim Porter is going to be calling in at 8:15. Tim works with trains. He is an advocate for trains, and I always think trains are pretty romantic. You know, the couple of times my wife and I have been able to take a train, especially if you're in a sleeper car, it's really romantic to watch the scenery going by, and it's done that. They've done that in a lot of movies and things, and it's also an environmentally practical way to travel, and we'll be hearing more about that from Tim starting about 8:15. Rebecca has been diligently doing some research on love and reproduction in nature, since there's a whole bunch of different strategies that different animals have for mating and finding their partners, and so we'll be learning a little bit about that. We'll be hearing from our advertisers down at the bottom of the hour, our wonderful advertisers. And then we've got some eco news for you. And hopefully we'll also be hearing from you, because this is a call-in show, and we do love it when people call in at 866-240-1065. That's 866-240-1065. You can ask about any ecological or environmental question. And if you've always had questions about reproduction in animals, like why do they do it that way, you could ask. We'll get it out there. We'll discuss it. It's interesting. It's an interesting topic, and so on this special Valentine's Day edition, we're going to be talking about that. So before we get to that, though, and before we get to our special guest, I just wanted to update you folks on a few things. Specifically, I wanted to update you with what's going on with the whole BG solar power controversy. As you know, I reported a couple weeks ago that Bowling Green has decided to fine people who've installed solar at a rate of $4 per kilowatt. And I actually went and talked to City Council, and if you are interested in what was said there, you can go to the Bowling Green City Council's Facebook page, and there's a video of what was said there. And I was lucky enough to get interviewed on Friday by a fellow by the name of Clint Corp, who has a radio program down here in Bowling Green called The Morning Show, and it goes every weekday morning. And he did a nice 15-minute interview where I got to make some points that responded to some points that have been given by the director of Bowling Green's Utilities, Brian O'Connell. And it's really kind of discouraging because this is what's being done here is that the city is using inaccurate numbers to suggest that those of us that have solar are kind of mooching off of everybody else, that we're kind of making everybody else pay for the poles and the wires, and then we're just sort of waltzing in with our solar panels and taking something away from everyone else because we're putting power onto the grid. And nothing can be further from the truth. But we environmentalists are used to getting this kind of inaccurate information from the government. I mean, I remember way back when I was in college, or just out of college, there was a law, regulation that was projected that would allow the coal plants down there along the Ohio Valley to quintuple the amount of arsenic that they put into the water. And I went and protested that law because there's a mechanism for allowing citizens to protest laws. And what happened was, a couple things happened during that whole experience. But one of them was that the state regulation, this Ohio State EPA, used a study to justify quintupling the arsenic. And they said in their regulation proposal that this study shows that there wouldn't be any environmental damage. Well, I went and read the study, and actually it said exactly the opposite. It said that if you increase the amount of arsenic, that you decrease the amount of phytoplankton. And as every good ecologist knows, phytoplankton are the basis of the food supply, the food chain. So if you reduce the amount of phytoplankton, you reduce everything all along the food chain, all the way up to bald eagles and bears and humans too, by the way. We are also dependent on there being a healthy phytoplankton community on this planet. So they used exactly the opposite study to justify it. And if you are an environmentalist, if you participate in environmentalism and try to get your input into the process, you find this over and over and over again. You just constantly are being lied to by the agencies. And another thing that happened, another lie that was told during that one is I contacted the Ohio EPA and I was like, well, what's going on with this? And they said, oh, don't worry, that's only to change the regulations for 2 streams that happen to be right next to coal plants. And that was also a lie. This regulation quintupled the allowable amount of arsenic in all of Ohio, every single waterway in the state of Ohio. So it's so I'm not surprised that the city is using inaccurate numbers to justify this fine on solar power. It's just it's a disappointment every time it happens. And so we're going to be continuing to fight this. There's some people that are going to come to the meeting, Bowling Green City Council meeting tomorrow, to talk more about this. And I'll keep you updated. I'll let you know how it goes, because the sad thing is that we have to fight these things. I mean, one of the other people that was involved in that has solar panels in Bowling Green, Leatra Harper, who's been a guest on this show, when I told her about this, she asked me, Joe, why do we always have to fight? I mean, here we each invested our own money in the solar panels to make the world a little cleaner, to make our Bowling Green's electricity supply a little less dependent on carbon. And now we're being forced to fight to be able to continue to do that, because these new penalties make it economically unviable. It means we're actually going to be paying more for our electricity than people who don't have solar panels, and it's really discouraging. And the answer, unfortunately, is usually the reason we have to fight is usually there's somebody somewhere along the line who's profiting by doing the wrong thing. And we've talked about this before, that it seems like doing the wrong thing, doing the environmentally damaging thing, pays a lot more. Seems like there's a direct link between doing something that hurts the environment and getting a bigger or smaller paycheck. Because some of the people I know that dedicate their lives to fighting pollution and making the world a cleaner and safer place for all of us, they live on next to nothing. They get a pittance because they have to work for nonprofits which don't have enough money because they're dependent on getting donations, and then they're up against people that are making tons of money because they're getting paid lots and lots of money. And you have to wonder, when people step back from this in the future, when people look back on our time and they see this situation, you have to really wonder what is going on. What's the problem? So I understand we have Rebecca on the line. Hey, Rebecca.
Hello.
Hi. Could you take the mic for just a second? I got a call coming in here.
Sure. Hi, this is Becca speaking here, and I'm in a minute going to be doing a little feature on sexual reproduction. And I just want to clarify that when we talk about this, it's not in any way knocking reproduction without sex or sex without reproduction, both of which are glorious expressions of the complex and beautiful human brain, which allows us so much creativity and ingenuity in the bedroom and also in the laboratory. So that'll be coming right up. And we want to talk a little bit about this because of pair bonding, which is kind of what St. Valentine's Day is all about. And most evolutionary scientists pretty much agree that originated because of the need to reproduce and care for little copies of yourself, which the basic definition of life, whether a thing is alive or not, is, does it move around? Does it make of its own volition? And does it make copies of itself? So reproduction is kind of involved in whether or not you are considered to be alive. Of course, some of us are conclusively not going to reproduce, and we're still alive. I'm pretty sure I'm still alive. I can check. Pulse, heartbeat, all that stuff.
We're grateful you are, Rebecca, I gotta say.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But I do, if someone's following the advice I was given earlier at the top of the hour and busily making a homemade Valentine right now, a line
right.
talking about, I need you to stay alive kind of a thing, that's always a good thing to include.
Although, as
anyway.
I discovered in my research, temperature and salinity are also important for romance, and how much magnesium is in the environment. So,
magnesium. Well, that's cool.
Make sure to check the magnesium and the salinity when you make your little half a heart.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, they talk about chocolates, but maybe you'd be better off with a magnesium pill in your Valentine there. I don't know. All right, well.
Depending.
So,
maybe if you're a microorganism, maybe algae. It's important for algae.
Gotcha.
Are there any algae listening out there?
Well, I'm sure they are, but one thing that's important for us humans, us, multicellular organisms, is transportation. And as I said at the start of the show, one of the types of transportation that I think is the most romantic, actually, is train travel. And so we have our special guest here, Tim Porter. Tim, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thanks for having me.
Oh, great. So could you just repeat your name for us and your position in your organization?
Yes, I'm Tim Porter. I'm the board chairman of Northwest Ohio Passenger Rail Association.
Okay. And on this Valentine's Day, Tim, I'm going to ask you, why do you think you love trains so much?
Well, it probably had to do when I was a kid, and I was in awe of the powerful engines that could pull so many cars on tracks. And as a kid traveling on them, you could get a nickel bag of peanuts in the shell, and you could walk up and down the aisles and that sort of thing. So it was very, it was a lot faster than driving. My dad didn't have to curse at the other drivers and everything. So it was a much better situation traveling in a train than it was in a car.
All right. So a lot more powerful and a lot more fun than just sitting in a little cramped little car seat. Yeah.
Right.
That's cool.
And back then they didn't have highways, so it was 2-lane roads.
Well, so speaking of highways and, that being the automobile driving, the things that right now is putting the most carbon in the air. If you could pluck one thing out and make it number one, it's automobile transportation. So could you talk to us a little bit about the environmental benefits of train travel versus car travel or plane travel?
Of all the oil that our country uses, rail accounts for only 8% in the world's motorized passenger movements, and 7% of freight. So, you think about it, that means 85% of all oil is used for something else, and 70% of that is used for automobiles. So you got to think about it, that's most of the pollution is caused by automobiles, small trucks, that way. The other ways to look at it, let's put it this way. Our government subsidizes the fossil fuel industry over $800 billion a year. Think about that. They talk about giving free money to poor people. Well, look what they're doing to corporations. So, that's one way to look at it. The other thing is that let's look at what the cost for traveling is. If you own and operate a car, it costs you a minimum. This is on average. This is taken from AAA. On average, $10,400 a year to own and operate it. That's it. That's not paying for the roads. That's not paying for the policeman. That's not paying for anything else. That's just for you to own and operate your car. It's got nothing to do with the environmental cost of making a car or of cars that end up in a junkyard. Those are just a straight cost that you pay for your car. So how much traveling could you do on public transit for $10,400 a year? And there's a few other things here that I'd like to point out to you.
Okay.
The U.S. Department of Energy found that intercity trains get 57 passenger miles per gallon versus cars at 40 passenger miles per gallon. So it's almost twice as efficient on per gallon of fuel used. And you're talking about the difference of between 7% and 75% of the fuel used. So not only is it almost half that cost of passenger mile per gallon, the cars do use so much more of the total volume of fuel that we use. Any other questions you want to ask me about that? So, maybe I can be a little more direct.
Well, a few weeks ago, we had a fella on Mark Jacobson, who was talking about how much more efficient electrical engines are than internal combustion engines. And he was saying that, you can get huge savings just by switching from carbon-based fuels to electrical based, and so I guess there's a lot more electrification going on of the railroad system, isn't there? And I guess the end result of this, I've been seeing on Facebook that places like Germany have solar-powered trains. Is there a lot? Is that a trend in the train industry?
Well, there are trains. I believe it was in France that is totally solar-powered. Okay, so that's a big step forward. And that's a high-speed rail. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And just going back to the oil thing, just to put this in perspective, all rail uses only about 2% of the world's transport energy demand. 2%. okay? So, all that rest of the energy is being used for something else. And when you think about how much we subsidize fossil fuel industry, wow, that tells you how much money we're wasting and why we're not as competitive internationally as we should be.
Right. So how did the Trump administration treat train travel? How did it do under his administration?
Well, they just about killed it.
Oh, okay.
They tried all they could to get rid of long-distance routes. They brought in a person from the airline industry who got rid of the dining cars and wanted to decrease put in more seats per car to decrease the leg room and essentially make it like an airplane.
But the dining car is one of the coolest things about the train.
Yes, exactly.
The leg room.
Right.
The leg room is great on trains.
Well, it's one reason why you go on trains is you have the leg room and you can have plenty of room for carrying on luggage and everything. That it's a comfort versus a plane where you're packed in there like a sardine.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the points we always make on the For a Green Future is that a green future, an ecologically balanced future, is actually more comfortable. It's travel is more pleasurable when you've got room and you can eat and walk around when you need to, and you don't have to watch the road every single second because somebody's doing that for you.
Yeah,
trains are really almost like first class on an airplane.
Yes, exactly.
Huh. So,
and the thing with this, the time you spend going through all the examinations in order to get on a plane, you have to get there about an hour early. You have to wait in line to get on the plane, and the plane sometimes waits on the tarmac. And then you finally are packed in there like sardines. You fly to your destination. You have to wait to get out, and then you have to go through everything to get back to some other kind of mode of transportation. It takes you as much time to travel 300 miles, actually less time to travel 300 miles by train than it does by plane. So
I believe it.
It's so much easier to travel by train. It's cheaper and more economical. Not only more economical, it's more green.
Yeah. My son just a few months ago visited us from Colorado, and we sent him. He flew in, but we sent him back by train, and he was just like, far and away the train was a better experience. But yeah. So President Biden, our new president, has a reputation as a train lover. Do you think the federal government's going to be friendlier to trains this administration than the previous?
Well, I hope so. I believe it will be. We now have both a President Biden and a Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, who was the mayor of South Bend, and he used Amtrak when he was going to Washington and stuff like that. So they're both enthusiastic, and Secretary Buttigieg actually said he wants to make us the world leader in high-speed rail. So to me, this is very optimistic. The other thing is that, I don't know whether you're aware of this, but in the previous Congress, realized that the House of Representatives, changes every 2 years. And in the previous session, they put in a bill for a infrastructure bank, national infrastructure bank. And what that would do is loan money at a cheap rate to do infrastructure, and but the bill has to pass both houses of Congress. It's sat on Mitch McConnell's desk for 3 years, or for 2 years. So hopefully with this new administration, we'll be able to get a national infrastructure bank passed, and that would decrease the amount of federal dollars coming from the general fund to fund infrastructure. So there's a lot of hope here with this new administration.
Okay. Well, that kind of brings me to my next question in terms of trains in Ohio. For years, people have talked about the 3C corridor here in Ohio. Could you tell us what that is and talk a little bit about that?
Well, that was from Cincinnati to Columbus to Cleveland, okay? And it was a very good plan. We had federal dollars to do it, but our governor at that time, Kasich, said, well, there's union drivers, I'm not going to let that go through. So we sent $600 million back to the federal government, and both Seattle and Minnesota really enjoyed that we did that because they got that money. Right now, the Amtrak has proposed 5 corridors going through Ohio. One is from Cleveland to Columbus to Dayton, the 3-state corridor. The other is Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Chicago. One is the Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit, Pontiac. The third is Cleveland, Buffalo, Albany, New York. And the third is Cleveland to Pittsburgh to New York. So there's, which is an extension of the Keystone Corridor. So those are the 5 that Amtrak has proposed, and there was just a discussion about that. So there's a lot of plans for rail going through the state of Ohio. The problem is that there's got to be the cooperation between the freight rail and the passenger rail in order to make it effective as it should be. And there's the other part that is being discussed is having separation of high-speed rail from freight rail, which would probably be the most logical avenue. For 50 years, there's supposed to have been agreement between freight and passenger rail to give passenger rail the right-of-way, but what's happened is that the freight rail controls those gates, so they have not been as cooperative as they could have been. People say it's about money. I think it's about attitude, but that's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm. So if the Biden administration were to somehow fulfill your wildest dreams in terms of rail policies, what would that look like? What would you be asking for?
Well, the first thing is to get that national infrastructure bill passed. That's $4 trillion and would result in about 25 million new jobs, paying at union-level wages.
Nice.
So that's $4 trillion into infrastructure. Now, we're not talking just rail, okay? We're talking water. We're talking broadband in rural areas. We're talking electricity, all those. And then you have the construction of dams and bridges and things like that. So it isn't just high-speed rail. It's $4 trillion for the whole kit and caboodle. If you go to the American Society of Civil Engineers, you can see how much where we are. I think we're around D+ of where we should be with our infrastructure. So we got a long ways to go to catch up because we've essentially let it go for the last 30 years or so. And the second is the push for high-speed rail, a level done, at a level done by the Chinese. Sometimes they can do 10 to 30 miles a day of putting in high-speed rail. So we can do this. We can compete internationally with anybody if we really want to.
Right. All right. Cool. So, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I just want everybody to know that yes, I'm one of the skeptics, but. Maybe I not sound like that, but I am skeptical. But we, right now, I believe, have an incredible opportunity to grow and actually establish high-speed rail as a separate mode of public transportation that hasn't been available for almost 80 years. People forget that back in the 1940s, we had interurban to connect the rural areas with the cities. A person could get on a interurban in Bellevue and go to the city of Toledo 3 times a day and come back at night and sleep in Bellevue. That can't happen now, and especially because if you don't have a car. So it makes it really difficult. So we don't really have the public transit infrastructure we need. So I'd like to see our country really invest in public infrastructure. Unfortunately, the state of Ohio is one of the 4th lowest states in the amount of money put into public transit. I think it's 63 cents per person. So we have a long ways to go, not only in the state, but in the whole country. So we need to really bring out better public transit, and especially high-speed rail, if we're going to compete in the future. And as you've noted, and as your program is talking about green, as I said before, the cost 2% of the world transportation demand is from trains. So, hey, think about that. That's
all right.
That's the most efficient way to move not only products but people. People do not realize that the biggest commodity this country has is its people. And if you can't move them efficiently and effectively, you're not going to compete in the world.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tim, for coming on. Just if people want to find out more about your organization, where would they go to do that?
Well, they can go to, I think it's nopra.net, or they can contact me at tfporter@bex.net, or they can call me, and that's 419-824-5462.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Tim, and happy Valentine's Day.
Well, happy Valentine's to you. I hope you guys have a good day. Thank you.
All right.
You too.
So that was Tim Porter. All right. So we're happy to hear from him, and now we're happy to hear from our sponsors. Foregrade Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's going on. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to go to their website, which is just wcparks.org. And, of course, they have an app you can get from the App Store. Just search for WC Parks, and there's a nice thing there where you can upload pictures to it, and there's a lot of pretty pictures there. And, of course, they're on social media like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's the Wood County Park District. And our show is also brought to you by our patrons. These are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com, that's Patreon, and they searched for a Green Future, and they found our little Patreon page there with our pictures of fun people doing fun, environmentally balanced things, and also some cats and dogs, because, you got to have cats and dogs. And they signed up for a patronage, right? At a monthly fee comes out, they get to choose the level. And every month a little bit comes out of their account and over to us, and we really appreciate it. It really helps us keep the show on the air. So, Rebecca, here we are on Valentine's Day. And so I understand you've been researching a little bit how nature goes about it, this whole reproduction, choosing a mate kind of a thing. Okay, let's hear.
Well, yeah. Sorry, I'm having some trouble with my assistant co-host. Sexual reproduction, the definition is the production of a new living organism by combining genetic info from two individuals of different types, by which they basically mean male and female, but also hermaphrodites get involved. Hermaphrodites either self-fertilize. Usually those are organisms like clams and things, barnacles, things that don't have very much mobility. So, it's hard for them to get out and meet people, but also hermaphrodites can have sexual reproduction with each other. The basic mechanism is that the organisms will both generate haploid cells, which are gametes, haploid gametes, which are basically, gametes are dedicated specifically to reproduction, and they're haploid, meaning that they have half the chromosomes necessary to make a complete individual. So then they get together and form a diploid cell. Usually, for a lot of human history, or for a lot of evolutionary history, this was outside of the body, sort of floating around somewhere, in air in case of plants, spores, or in water. But yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, in a lot of ways, asexual reproduction, where you just sort of divide, it was meiosis, they call that. It was doing fine for really, millions of years. And then this new thing came along. They think, I heard someplace that sexual reproduction was actually originated as a form of parasitism, meaning there were these weird parasitic unicellular organisms that started hijacking other cells and injecting their genetic material. But it caught on, and it caught on because although in a lot of ways you can reproduce faster and more efficiently with asexual reproduction, the great thing about sexual reproduction is that it produces unique individuals because you sort of roll the genetic dice and every time that you reproduce. So if things get a little bit too hot, too cold, wrong chemicals that is a danger to you, if there's some sort of new, organism that's a predator or a disease or something, if you and all your relatives are in fact genetic exact copies of each other, twins effectively, then you might be in trouble because you might just all die off at once, the whole species. Whereas if you're working with people with like different combinations of things, then you've got a situation where there might be one individual who has just the right combination of genetic material that will somehow survive this. Of course, you've also got mutations. Things can change by mutation, and there can be that one person with or an individual with a mutation that actually survives the current conditions better. So, change is good. Change is good. I mentioned hermaphrodites already. Greater adaptability is great. Oh, hermaphroditic organisms include earthworms, slugs, tapeworms, and snails. So, if you go to Encyclopedia Britannica and look up in sexual reproduction, it sort of does a very brief sort of general opening paragraph, and then it immediately starts to talk about algae a lot. I don't know. I think that maybe
algae.
Britannica is a little worried people will get too excited, and so they're thinking, what's the least sexy organism to humans? Probably green slime, Although,
when you say romance,
probably,
algae isn't the first thing that pops to mind. So, yeah, go ahead.
Mostly no, but they probably don't think we're very attractive either, Joe, to be fair. They're all, what are you great big dry pink things? Ick,
Okay, fair point. Fair point.
Yes. This is how I learned that diatoms, a form of plankton, they kind of like to change things up. They get smaller and smaller via asexual reproduction. And then at some point they're just too small, so they start doing sexual reproduction to restore their size, which is nice.
Oh, that's weird.
So we've got that, and, the whole thing is sort of tied to romance, and yet, we know that also romance without sexual reproduction is also useful, as witness the example of those two lovely bachelor gentlemen penguins at SeaWorld who keep raising other people's discarded eggs. So that's actually, it's an evolutionary advantage. that pair bonding of itself kind of took off aside from disconnected the sexual reproduction because it kind of helps the species if there's somebody around they think who can care for young people whose biological parents cannot care for them.
Well, I know that there's a lot of once you've got a pair bonded that birds like to mate for life. A lot of birds are monogamous. And then once you've got that monogamous couple, yes, they raise their own children, but a lot of times, sometimes you'll see birds sort of foster parenting or babysitting for other couples too.
Right.
Like loons will do that. You'll see, and ducks are kind of famous for that. You'll see, one pair of duck that has like all the couples on the pond leave their kids with them and go off and do stuff, and then so
there you go. Or you have the allo mother phenomenon where people who don't reproduce or individuals who don't reproduce also also hunt for the babies, help feed them, help take care of them for a minute so their mom can get a break, and also have experiences and things that they can tell that we're really, really hungry right now. I remember this tree where there was bananas 25 years ago, that kind of thing. So It's all kind of like everybody kind of has their place,
right.
in ensuring the survival of the species as best we can here.
Okay. Well, we've obviously just just scratched the surface here of this whole topic.
Pretty much, yeah.
I'm afraid we're got to kind of move on, but yeah, monogamy is there in the birds, and then there's literally every other possible permutation you could think of, and I think that scientists, there's some theories on why this organism will be monogamous and that organism will be promiscuous, and that's actually a classification. Promiscuous organisms are ones that just mate with anybody that they run into.
Probably varies from situation to situation, because what kind of behavior is going to ensure survival or maximize the chances of survival in this particular situation.
Yeah, and I also like to think that it's just also a question of romance, of what who actually prefers. And actually, sexual preference is a thing in reproduction. Some species, the preference of the female completely drives the way the males evolve in terms of their looks, or maybe they've got big horns or colorations or things like that. So love and choice and that is important in nature too. But us humans, we've kind of taken it to a new level with things like Valentine's and yeah, but it's time to move on now. So thanks very much for that report, Rebecca. And now it's time for Eco News. And start out with some good eco news on this Valentine's. And that is that last year, 2020, Europe generated more power by renewables than fossil fuels. So they've crossed the line. They've made it into now. Yes, now and when they say renewables, they specifically mean wind and solar and geothermal, the same definition that Mark Jacobson had a few weeks ago. And so the renewables last year in 2020 produced 38% of Europe's power, Europe's energy, whereas fossil fuels only produced 37%. So it wasn't that a knockout, but the trends are very clear. The fossil fuels in Europe are going down, and the renewables are going up, and they're benefiting from that in every way. Not just having clean energy, not just the existential thing that they're working towards saving the planet, but the clean energy is cheaper energy, and it puts out less pollution, so their people are healthier, and it takes less work, so they don't have people that are burning themselves out working in mines and dying in their mid-50s or anything like that. So they're kicking our butt, Rebecca. Europe is kicking our butt, but it's good.
We're just kind of lying down and letting it be kicked, to be fair.
That's true. That is true.
We're kind of sort of backing up to them and being like, "Here's my butt. Kick some more."
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're the ones that put the "kick me" sign on our.
There we go. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, so going from there to an interesting eco bit of news, or an ecological relationship that I found interesting. A story came out this past week that Lyme disease, is a terrible disease. It's a spirochete bacteria, and it can mimic arthritis, and it can cause all kinds of problems for people that catch Lyme disease. And it's carried by ticks. And for a long time, researchers have been kind of stumped because there's a very sharp line, and people down in the southern part of the country don't tend to get Lyme disease. And whereas up in the north here, where it's colder, Lyme disease has been spreading rapidly and getting more and more serious. And they were trying to figure out what was going on. And it turns out, here's a complex ecological relationship that has direct effect on human health, which is why I wanted to tell you about this story. And that is that ticks, those things that you see when you find a tick, all those legs and the head that gets buried in the skin and so forth, that's actually the adult form. So if you get bit by that kind of a tick, you're the second organism that tick has bitten, because before that, as a much less developed sort of a nymph, ticks will come on, they'll get on an organism and bite it and take a little bit of blood and a little bit of skin and then drop off and finish their metamorphosis into the adult form. And that's how Lyme disease gets transmitted by the ticks, is they'll bite the first organism that has Lyme disease, fall off, develop, they're still carrying the bacteria, then they bite the next host, which could be you or your dog or anybody, and that's when the Lyme disease gets transmitted. Well, it turns out that south of a certain point, that the ticks their preferred host are lizards, are specifically skinks. And skinks are very resistant to Lyme disease, and they actually very seldom carry it or have it. So that the immature ticks that start out biting Lyme or biting these lizards don't then transmit the Lyme disease to whatever kind of organisms they bite when they're adults, because the skinks just don't get Lyme disease. So it's just an interesting kind of interconnection there. And parasites like ticks connect all kinds of critters, because many of them have life cycles that'll go through 2 or 3 different hosts. And so it's just an interesting little story that, down south, they got plenty of other diseases and things. So it's not like you want to move south to avoid Lyme disease, just, because you'll run into other stuff. But I just thought that was an interesting illustration, connection between the ecosystem.
Sorry, my dog was having a coughing fit.
That's all right. I hope he's all right.
Yes. He's fine. He's half pug, and pugs have a collapsed trachea, so sometimes he has to cough till his airways open, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I found that out once. I was pulling in a driveway to visit somebody who had a pug, and I couldn't figure out why the dog wasn't moving, because I was like driving 1 mile an hour towards it. It was just sitting there, and then it fell over. And it turns out...
it got overexcited, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it got overexcited.
Full-bred pugs will do that.
And it passed out. It was a very strange experience. Okay. All right. Anyway, one more big piece of eco news I wanted to share with people, and that is we're coming up, March 11th, we're coming up on the 10th anniversary of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, the triple meltdown of the Fukushima plants. And I'll tell you a little bit after this report about something a lot of people are doing to mark that anniversary. But just in time for the 10th anniversary, the government of Japan, which released at the time and afterwards just unbelievable amounts of disinformation, incorrect stuff that they had to, that they eventually, a lot of it, they walked back and say, oh, you know what, that was wrong. We were wrong about that for years and years. A lot of it, for example, would be the amount of radiation released. They've continuously, over this course of the 10 years, kept upgrading the amount of radiation they said released. And compared to what they were saying at the time, I think right now, I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 times more radiation that they've admitted to than they did way back when the accident was happening. And then, they're not done, because they just discovered that the covers to the radioactive, to the reaction chamber, nuclear plants are kind of like pressure cookers. They've got this big metal tank, and then they bolt this incredibly thick lid down on the top of it. And they just discovered that those lids are something like 10,000 times more radioactive than they had estimated they would be, which makes the whole cleanup thing much more difficult, because now essentially workers, if they go towards those lids, if they stay within their range with it for less than an hour, they'll be dead. That's even, it doesn't matter if you got the radiation suit on, gamma radiation will just shoot right through that. And so that's one thing. So that means that, again, they were wrong about what happened and how much radiation was released, because that's how they estimated how radioactive these lids should be. But to the bit of disinformation, the first 2 reactors that exploded at Fukushima were very clearly hydrogen explosions. And I've talked about this way back in our very first shows, I talked about this, that hydrogen explosions are short and they're sharp, and they have a sort of a characteristic look about them. And the first two reactors that exploded at Fukushima clearly were hydrogen explosions. But the third reactor that exploded couple days later, that explosion was a mushroom cloud. And that explosion blasted the ceiling of the reactor building, which was, nuclear reactor buildings are made of huge, thick concrete and steel reinforcement beams, and it blew the roof of the reactor building over about 1,000 feet into the air. And
holy guacamole.
Yes, I have always said that there's no way that a hydrogen explosion could possibly have that much energy, that there's just not enough energy in the chemical reaction of a hydrogen explosion to blow the roof of a reactor building 1,000 feet into the air. And so what they've just done is they come out with an enhanced video of what happened. They use modern image processing techniques, and they've created a much sharper video. And you can see the mushroom cloud forming, and you can see the chunks of roof being blown 1,000 feet into the air. It's really awesome. But now they've come up with a new disinformation theory. Okay, their theory is that the wires, the insulation around the wires of the plant, that as it got hot in the plant, that insulation around the wires melted and created gases, and that at some point somehow those gases ignited, and that's what caused this tremendous explosion.
Alrighty.
And again,
or
no.
Occam's razor. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely not, because again, you're just talking a chemical reaction, and now you're not talking even a chemical reaction that's as energetic as a hydrogen reaction. Because when wires burn, they put out this thick, nasty smoke that yeah, some of it's combustible, but a lot of it isn't. A lot of it's just soot, and then you just can't get that kind of force from the smoke from burning wires. And if it could, why didn't that happen in the other reactors? My theory, and so far no one has contradicted me, or actually when I've told this theory to nuclear scientists, they were like, well, we don't know. And they don't know. But my theory is, turns out that uranium and plutonium are soluble in water. So as the reactor rods were melting and burning, the smoke and the uranium and the plutonium would dissolved into what was left of the water of the cooling chamber. But here's the trick. They're only soluble in water as long as there's oxygen present. If you dissolve them in the water and then take away the oxygen, the uranium and the plutonium, pure uranium and plutonium, precipitate out. And you might remember precipitation from your chemistry class. They form little flakes of metal that just appear in the water and then sink down to the bottom. And so if you've got a reactor that's going and going and going, and you take, dissolving stuff in this water, then you take the oxygen away, and this stuff starts precipitating, it'll form a layer of uranium and plutonium on the bottom of the reactor chamber. And if that layer gets thick enough, at some point it will explode like a nuclear bomb. And that's my theory about what happened. And nuclear scientists, nuclear power people are trained. It's drilled into their heads from day one. Nuclear power plants cannot explode like nuclear bombs. That's one of the 10 commandments, but it happened, all right? That's my opinion, because people sitting on a mountaintop 10 miles away from the third reactor that exploded felt the mountain shake when that explosion happened. And that doesn't happen by burning off the smoke from burn fire inflation. So on March 11th, there's going to be an event called Unplugged Nuclear Power that you can participate at in your home. And we'll talk about that more in the next episode. But you can look for it at unpluggednuclearpower.com or check them out on Facebook. I hear the music. Well, Rebecca, we've come to the end of our very special Valentine's show. So
here we have.
Yes. So I want to just say this is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
For kids with leukemia.